The year is 1940. The world is holding its breath. One by one, the lights of freedom are going out across Europe. The seemingly unstoppable German war machine has crushed Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And now, France, the great bastion of continental liberty, is buckling, its armies shattered, its government in chaos. Across a narrow channel of water, one nation stands practically alone, bracing for the coming storm: Britain. In quiet homes, bustling factories, and tense corridors of power, the British people huddle around their wireless sets. They're waiting for a voice, not for comfort or false hope, but for a voice that can meet the terrible gravity of the moment. A voice that can articulate their fear but also forge it into a weapon. They are waiting for their new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. For over 80 years, many of Churchill's pivotal speeches have existed only on the written page, or as recordings clouded by the hiss and static of old technology. That veil of time has distanced us from the raw, immediate power of those words. The true timbre of his voice, the precise cadence of his delivery, the electric atmosphere of a nation on the brink. What if we could experience it with new ears? What if we could pull back that veil? What if we could use the most advanced technology of our time to reach back and restore that voice? For the first time, using cutting-edge artificial intelligence, we have meticulously reconstructed Winston Churchill's most pivotal speeches from the desperate spring and summer of 1940. This isn't just about cleaning up old audio. It's a digital restoration of history itself. By feeding an AI model with the clearest existing recordings and the precise verified texts of his addresses, we've rebuilt his voice, allowing us to hear these monumental speeches with a clarity once thought impossible. This is a journey into the heart of Britain's darkest hour. It's a forensic examination of how one man's words evolved, week by week, to meet an ever-escalating crisis. We'll analyze how his rhetoric shifted from sober pronouncements to soaring defiance as Britain first faced, and then accepted, its solitary stand against tyranny. Prepare to hear history as you've never heard it before. Now, before we go any further, a quick note on how we did this is essential. The audio you're about to hear is an AI-powered reconstruction, not an original recording. Our goal was to create a faithful representation of how these speeches might have sounded, based on the best evidence available. We began with the most authoritative transcripts for each speech, sourced from academic archives and the International Churchill Society. It's important to remember that Churchill's famous "blood, toil, tears, and sweat" and "we shall fight on the beaches" speeches were delivered to the House of Commons and weren't broadcast live to the public. Instead, newsreaders would read excerpts on the BBC. Our reconstructions are based on the full, original texts delivered by Churchill himself. To create the voice, our AI was trained on the clearest available recordings of Churchill's broadcast voice from the period, including his well-documented BBC broadcasts from the summer of 1940. These provided authentic samples of his vocal timbre, his pacing, and the acoustic qualities of the time. The AI learned to replicate these characteristics: the slight roll-off of high frequencies from a ribbon microphone, the way his voice would resonate in a studio, even the subtle patterns of his breathing. This isn't an actor's impersonation, it's a data-driven acoustic model. Finally, we meticulously guided the AI's performance using the text itself as a map. We annotated the transcripts to control for rhythm, emphasis, and pauses, ensuring the delivery matched the rhetorical intent of the words. The result is a synthesis of historical text, acoustic data, and technological innovation, presented here to offer a new perspective on words that shaped the world. Our story begins on May 10, 1940, one of the most fateful days of the 20th century. As dawn broke, Hitler launched his blitzkrieg against France and the Low Countries. That same day in London, the political crisis that had been simmering for months boiled over. Neville Chamberlain resigned. King George VI summoned Winston Churchill to Buckingham Palace and asked him to form a government. Churchill was 65. His career had been a roller coaster of stunning triumphs and catastrophic failures. To many, he was a brilliant but erratic maverick, a warmonger, a political outcast. Yet, at this moment of supreme crisis, he was, as he later wrote, convinced that he was walking with destiny. That evening, he needed to address the nation for the first time as prime minister. The context is everything. The full scale of the disaster in France wasn't yet clear to the public. The mood was one of grim uncertainty, not outright panic. Churchill's task wasn't to sound a thunderous alarm, but to project quiet, unshakable competence. He needed to be a pillar of stability in a world that was suddenly liquid. His first broadcast, therefore, was a masterpiece of administrative resolve. The following reconstruction is not a direct, verbatim quote from a single transcript, but a composite that captures the sober, formal essence of his first public statements. Let's listen now to the reconstruction of that message. I speak to you for the first time as Prime Minister in a solemn hour for the life of our country, of our empire, of our allies, and above all, of the cause of freedom. A tremendous battle is raging in France and Flanders. The Germans, by a remarkable combination of air bombing and heavily armored tanks, have broken through the French defenses. I have formed a new administration, embracing men and women of every party and of almost every point of view. It is a government of national unity. We have but one aim and one single, irrevocable purpose. We are resolved to wage war until victory is won, and never to surrender ourselves to servitude and shame, whatever the cost and the agony may be. This is one of the most awe-striking periods in the long history of France and Britain. It is not a time for boasting or for glowing prophecies, but it is a time for stout and robust deeds. I have received from the chiefs of the three services assurances that we shall be able to carry on the war at sea, on land, and in the air with the utmost vigor. The task which has been laid upon me is the greatest in our history. I hope I shall be found not unequal to the strain. What we hear isn't the roar of the British bulldog, it's the firm, steady voice of a chairman of the board. The language is procedural. I have formed a new administration. The tone is sober and measured. He acknowledges the tremendous battle, but he quickly pivots to the mechanics of governance and the assurances of his military chiefs. This was a deliberate choice. He needed to project authority and control, not passion. The nation needed to believe the ship of state had a firm hand on the rudder. He lays the foundation for what's to come with that simple, powerful statement of purpose. We are resolved to wage war until victory is won. There's no poetry here, just a blunt statement of fact. This is the baseline from which all his other speeches will build, delivered with unwavering, almost cold, resolve. Just 3 days later, Churchill stood before the House of Commons for the first time as Prime Minister. The military situation had deteriorated rapidly. The German breakthrough was now a full-blown crisis. The need for a sober administrative tone had passed. Now he had to define the very spirit of his new government. He had to manage expectations, not with comforting platitudes, but with a dose of reality so stark it became paradoxically inspiring. This speech, delivered to his fellow politicians, was where the true Churchillian rhetoric was forged in the fire of 1940. It is here he makes his famous stark offer. He doesn't promise success or an easy path. He promises sacrifice. He takes pain and struggle and transforms them from things to be feared into the very price of victory. This wasn't a broadcast. He was speaking to the political class, the people who would have to sanction the brutal decisions ahead. He was forging a pact with them, sealed not with ink, but with the promise of shared hardship. The power of this speech lies in its brutal honesty and its rhythmic, almost liturgical simplicity. Let's listen to the AI reconstruction of the key passages. I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined this government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny, never surpassed in the dark, lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word. It is victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. For without victory, there is no survival. Let that be realized. No survival for the British Empire, no survival for all that the British Empire has stood for, no survival for the urge and impulse of the ages that mankind will move forward towards its goal. But I take up my task with buoyancy and hope. I feel sure that our cause will not be suffered to fail among men. At this time, I feel entitled to claim the aid of all, and I say, come then, let us go forward together with our united strength. Hearing those words with such clarity really underscores their power. The evolution from the speech just 3 days prior is remarkable. What are your thoughts on this shift in tone? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're finding this reconstruction of history valuable, please consider subscribing for more content like this. The change is breathtaking. The administrative prose of May 10th has been burned away, replaced by something primal and powerful. Blood, toil, tears, and sweat is one of the most famous phrases in the English language, and its power comes from its sheer, unadorned simplicity. He isn't hiding the cost. He's making it the centerpiece of his offer. Notice the structure. He asks a question and then immediately answers it. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, you ask, what is our aim? I can answer. This creates a powerful didactic rhythm. It feels less like a political speech and more like a catechism, a statement of faith. And then, the word victory. He repeats it 4 times, hammering the point home until it becomes the only possible outcome. Finally, he defines the stakes. This is no longer just a war between nations. It is a war for survival. Not just for Britain and its empire, but for the very impulse of the ages. He is elevating the conflict from a geopolitical struggle to an existential crusade for the future of humanity. In just 3 days, Churchill transformed from the nation's new manager into its warrior prophet. 3 weeks later, the world had changed again. The Battle of France was lost. The British Expeditionary Force, along with French allies, had been cornered at Dunkirk. In a near-miraculous evacuation, over 338,000 men were rescued by a flotilla of naval vessels and civilian little ships. It was a deliverance, but one born from a colossal military defeat. Britain now truly stood without a major ally in Europe, facing the full might of the Nazi war machine. Invasion seemed not just possible, but imminent. On June 4th, Churchill again addressed the House of Commons. His task was immense. He had to report on the disaster of Dunkirk, acknowledging the gravity of the defeat, yet simultaneously galvanize the nation for a fight to the death on their own soil. He had to turn the relief of the evacuation into the resolve for the coming battle. This speech is perhaps the most famous example of his defiant spirit. Again, the nation didn't hear him deliver this live, but the words themselves were so powerful they created their own legend. We can only imagine the impact if they had heard it delivered with the full force of his conviction. Our Reconstruction aims to bridge that gap. Let's listen to the legendary conclusion of his June 4th speech. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle, until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old. This is the language of pure, unyielding defiance. The core of its power lies in that stunning repetition, "We shall fight." It acts like a drumbeat, a relentless rhythm of resolve. It transforms a map of the British Isles into a litany of battlegrounds. The beach, the fields, the streets, they're no longer just places. They are now ideas, symbols of a total national commitment. He performs a masterful rhetorical trick. He begins by acknowledging the colossal military disaster, but ends with an image of absolute, unbreakable will. He doesn't ignore the possibility of defeat on the island itself, but he immediately dismisses it and then provides a vision of continued resistance from the empire, with a final, hopeful glance towards the new world, America. This was a message for multiple audiences. For the British people, it was a call to arms. For Hitler, it was a clear signal that Britain would not negotiate. And for the United States, it was both a plea for help and a demonstration of worthiness, a promise that Britain would hold the line. On June 18, 1940, Winston Churchill delivered his iconic finest hour speech at a pivotal moment in World War II. With Germany's victory in France and the fall of Paris, Britain stood alone against the Nazi threat. Marshal Pétain, the new French leader, sought an armistice, leaving Britain to face the full force of Hitler's war machine. Churchill's speech was not just an appeal for resistance, but a call to frame Britain's struggle as a moment of immense historical importance. In his address, he positioned the upcoming Battle of Britain as the decisive fight for civilization itself. He declared that the survival of Christian civilization depended on Britain's ability to withstand the Nazi onslaught. If they could stand firm, Europe might be freed, and the world could move forward into a brighter future. But failure would plunge the world into a dark age, dominated by tyranny and perverted science. Churchill's words gave the British people a new sense of purpose, not as victims, but as the guardians of freedom. He concluded with a stirring pledge, ensuring that if Britain endured, future generations would remember this as their finest hour. This was their finest hour. With that single, electrifying phrase, Churchill completes his rhetorical journey. In just 39 days, we've witnessed a masterclass in leadership through language. He began on May 10th as a wartime administrator, his words designed to project stability. By May 13th, he became the high priest of sacrifice, offering nothing but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. On June 4th, with the nation reeling from Dunkirk, he became the defiant warrior, promising, "We shall never surrender." And finally, on June 18th, as Britain stood alone against a Nazi-dominated Europe, he became the grand historian of the present moment. He elevated their plight from a desperate struggle into a noble duty. He gave them the broad, sunlit uplands to fight for and the new dark age to fight against. Through the power of artificial intelligence, we've tried to strip away the static of the decades and feel the evolution of that power. This project is a testament to the idea that while technology marches forward, the human voice and the words it carries can echo with undiminished force across the ages. The ordeal of 1940 was Britain's, but the lesson of how language can forge courage in the face of fear belongs to everyone. What other historical speeches hold a similar power for you? And what other figures should we bring to life next with this technology? Thank you for joining us on this journey back to 1940. If you found this analysis insightful, please like this video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next exploration into the past. Your support allows us to continue bringing history to life in new and innovative ways.